Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first annual Leonberg Prize for Excellence in Rhetoric. We have 4 of our contestants here right now. A 5th one will be arriving soon. Just from the joys of online education, we have various time zones represented. We also have our 3 judges and Mrs. Lori Miller, who taught the class that is bringing the contestants into this year's contest. We'll introduce everybody shortly. But I do want to let everyone know that this prize, the first of what we hope will be many years of competition, is springing from a particular class, competitive speech taught by Mrs. Miller, and every year will be associated with a particular class. So keep an eye on all the wonderful rhetoric things that we have going on, all the wonderful rhetoric classes and rhetoric activities that we have going on at Kepler Education. Kepler is a platform for independent teachers to offer a classical Christian education to homeschooling families. Now, Kepler is more than just the classes. Kepler is also Kepler Life. Kepler Life is all the activities, the clubs, and the deeds that our students get up to. Students organize volunteer activities, students participate in chess club or Spanish club or in student government, all through Kepler Life. And Kepler Life is glad to present this particular competition. So we're grateful to our judges and we're grateful to Mrs. Miller for setting this up. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone to her. Mrs. Lori Miller.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to teach this class this summer. These kids are amazing. I know you'll enjoy listening to them speak. Our first speaker up this morning is Mr. Levi Dittman. So Levi, if you're ready.
Did you know that evolutionary biology has been and continues to be a cornerstone of modern science? At least according to the National Academy of Sciences. They also claim that there is no controversy in the scientific community about whether evolution has occurred. These are bold claims. 1, evolution is the foundation for science. And 2, it is an unquestionable fact. Now wait a minute. Since Christianity is directly opposed to evolution, there seems to be a problem. Science versus religion. Today I want to talk to you about science, the Christian faith, and the theory of evolution. It is vital that we address this issue because science always seems to be the trump card for the evolutionist when arguing against Christianity. However, science does not contradict Christianity. Far from it. Rather, science only makes sense in a Christian worldview. Allow me to explain. Science relies on presuppositions, and a rational person must be able to justify these presuppositions within their worldview. Only the Christian worldview can justify the presuppositions of science, thus only the Christian worldview can make sense of science. As a result, the fact that the evolutionist can do science at all proves that his position is wrong. Please realize that this argument applies equally well to any non-Christian religion. But since it is the evolutionary worldview that has such a stronghold on the sciences, I'm going to limit this discussion to that. First of all, let me give a couple of definitions. In this speech, when I say science, I mean the scientific method, not the discoveries of scientists. Dictionary.com gives the following definition of the scientific method. A method of research in which a problem is identified, relevant data are gathered, a hypothesis is formulated from these data, and the hypothesis is empirically tested. As for the theory of evolution, I don't mean natural selection. I mean evolution as a theory of how life first came to exist and then evolve into humans. Now, it's time to jump into my first claim. Science relies on presuppositions, and a rational person must be able to justify these presuppositions within their worldview. What on earth did I mean by that? Well, let's look at the beginning, and specifically at the word presupposition. A presupposition is simply something that must be assumed before it can be proven. For instance, the reliability of our memory and senses is a basic assumption that we all make before crossing the street, showing up to a party, or reading a book. However, we cannot prove that our memory and senses are reliable before we use them. Dr. Jason Lisle gives this example in his book, The Ultimate Proof of Creation. Someone might claim, I can prove my memory is reliable. It's easy. I took a memory test 3 weeks ago that shows that my memory is just fine. But we must ask, how do you know you took a memory test 3 weeks ago? You remember it? So, we see what a presupposition is. But does science involve presuppositions? Science does involve a number of presuppositions. The reliability of scientists' memories and senses is one example. Another would be laws of logic. Science assumes the law of non-contradiction. That is, something is not true and false at the same time and in the same sense. Wouldn't it be funny if a scientist poured some fluid out of a vial and found that at the same time the same fluid was still in the vial? That would be impossible. Besides the laws of logic, science presupposes that there is a uniformity and regularity to creation. In other words, scientists assume that Newton's law of gravity is true today, it will be true tomorrow, and its truth is independent of time or location. No one traveling to Antarctica wonders if gravity will still pull them down there, or if it will keep them on their feet tomorrow. These are but a few of the presuppositions without which science would be impossible. Now it's time to move on to the second part of my statement. A rational person must be able to justify these presuppositions within their worldview. While presuppositions can and must be assumed, if there's no justification for these presuppositions, then they're arbitrary. In logic, arbitrariness is a big no-no. No one is allowed to be arbitrary. If we were, you could say, I am 6 feet tall. But I could retort, no, you're 6 inches tall. It'd be my word against yours until you pulled out a measuring tape to back your claim. Arbitrariness reduces truth to mere opinion. Presuppositions must be justified. So, the question boils down to this. Which worldview can provide a rational justification for things like the reliability of our senses, laws of logic, and uniformity in nature? But wait a minute. The theory of evolution is not a worldview. It's science, right? Not exactly. Our worldview is the framework through which we view everything else. In light of this, we can see that evolution is a worldview. It sees humans as evolved beings and the universe as a chance accident. So, the question remains, which worldview can account for the presuppositions of science? Well, this brings me to a second main point. Only the Christian worldview can justify the presuppositions of science. Thus, only the Christian worldview can make sense of science. We are now going to look at two of the most important presuppositions in science, that is, laws of logic and uniformity in nature, and see how this is so. First, laws of logic. Logic is an attribute of God. It was not created by him, but rather reflects the way he thinks. In his book, The Ultimate Proof of Creation, Dr. Jason Lisle writes, since the God of Scripture is immaterial, sovereign, and beyond time, it makes sense to have laws of logic that are immaterial, universal, and unchanging. Since God made the universe and since God made our minds, it makes sense that our minds would have an ability to study and understand the universe. Okay, but what about something like the law of non-contradiction? Do we find that in Scripture? 2 Timothy 2:13 says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. Here we find the basis for the law of non-contradiction. So, we see that the Christian worldview can justify logic. What about the evolutionary worldview? To quote Dr. Jason Lisle again, but if the universe and our minds are simply the results of time and chance, as the evolutionist contends, why would we expect that the mind could make sense of the universe? You see, if the theory of evolution is true, then there's no rational reason to expect that the law of non-contradiction is true without exception. There's no reason to believe that it is true everywhere, and there's no reason to believe that it will be true tomorrow. Yet science depends on this fundamental axiom. Moving on, let's consider the uniformity of nature. Genesis 8:22 says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. God's nature never changes, and he promises a certain amount of regularity in creation. On the other hand, how do we know that the future will be the same as the past in a chance universe? How do we know that the quadratic formula will work tomorrow? How do we know that gravity won't reverse itself overnight and we'll wake up with our bodies touching the ceiling? The evolutionist might respond, well, in the past, things have always been the same as the past. But this is just reasoning in a vicious circle. How do we know that this will continue to be the case? For the Christian, the answer is easy. God has revealed this to us through his word. It is only through the Christian worldview that the uniformity of nature can be understood. So, what is the consequence of this? Well, when evolutionists use the scientific method, they're relying on Christian principles. So the fact that they can even do science is proof that the Christian worldview is true. When evolutionists do science, they're being irrational because science only makes sense in a Christian worldview. However, as can be seen by my opening quotes, evolutionists have done an excellent job of equating evolution with science and thus posing it as science versus religion to bring us back to the original problem. Many Christians feel that they have to resolve this problem in some way or another. I believe that the correct response, and the one I want to challenge you to make, is to reject the problem itself and flip it on its head. The theory of evolution and the scientific method are incompatible because the scientific method only makes sense in a Christian worldview. Thank you. And thank you to the judges for taking time to judge today.
Thank you, Levi, so much. I really appreciate hearing you speak. Right at the moment, all of our 3 judges will be working on their ballots, and so I'm going to make a few comments. I do want to thank our 3 judges. We have Mr. Geoffrey Swait. He is the parent and teacher counselor for Kepler. We've got Mr. Scott Postma, who is the president of Kepler, and we have Mrs. Helen Howell, who is one of Kepler's teachers. So thank you so much for judging. Kepler offers rhetoric. In fact, Kepler, one of Kepler's key points is teaching rhetoric. Rhetoric has gotten a terribly bad rap in our culture. The name rhetoric has become symbolic with politicians dodging the question or learning to say very little in very many words. However, 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. This is the proper use of true rhetoric. So I'm delighted that these students are learning the proper use of true rhetoric. Some other comments. Roman Roads Media states that students who learn classical rhetoric learn the theory of using words well and practice the skills of effective oratory. We want them to do that. We want them to learn to use words well and to practice the skills of effective oratory because they're going to need to speak to a culture that needs to hear truth. Another classical education website says, the student of rhetoric applies the rules of logic to foundational information and expresses his conclusions in clear, forceful, elegant language. That's from the Well-Trained Mind website. So that's what we long for these students to learn to do, and that's what they're well on their way to doing. So do our judges need a little more time? Helen, you all right now? Okay, great. I really do appreciate you all speaking. Our next speaker is going to be Miss Annika Owen. Annika, please remember to unmute your mic. Okay.
In the movie Chariots of Fire, the Olympic runner and missionary Eric Liddell says, God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. The movie opens with a stirring scene of Liddell racing along a beach. His face is filled with passion and joy as he delights in what he loves. Have you ever watched a runner speeding by, tried to imagine yourself running, but dismissed it as impossible? Contrary to what you may believe, the sport of running is beneficial and open to all. You can probably guess by this point that I love to run. When I was only 8 years old, I started road running with my father. What you probably can't guess is that my father hated running. Growing up, he did not enjoy sports and had never run 1 mile before. So what changed? Well, he still didn't like running, but he enjoyed the health benefits that came along with it. A study from Iowa State University shows that running at a moderate pace for just 10 minutes a day can increase lifespan. The same study shows that running also reduces your risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular disease. Jane Chertoff on Healthline.com tells us that running strengthens your lungs and heart, reduces your risk of cancer, and can help you lose extra weight. Best of all, studies like one published in Preventative Medicine show that running lifts your mood because running produces endorphins, which are chemicals released by the body to relieve stress and pain. When I'm stressed or upset and I go for a run, I always come back happier, no matter how physically hard the run was. If you hate the thought of running, you can probably think of plenty of excuses to avoid it. Well, I'm here to shoot those excuses full of holes. You can enjoy running whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, because running can be an individual or communal sport. Extroverts can choose to run with friends, family, or the running community, and introverts can run alone. I prefer running with groups of other people. It's easy to form friendships with people while running together, and I'm more outgoing at ease when I'm talking to people while running. Even as an extrovert, I occasionally prefer to run alone to clear my thoughts, pray, or think something through, though generally, running in big groups of people is my favorite. At Noob Sanity, the obstacle course I attend, we run in big groups, and that's one of the reasons I thrive there. It's a wonderful community, and running with my friends encourages me. Unlike some other sports, geographical location or lack of financial wealth are not boundaries to running. You can run in the city, park, country, town, woods, fields, or anywhere. It doesn't matter where you live. I've gone on runs in almost all of those settings. I've run in towns while on vacation, and when I'm home, I run in the fields and woods. I have even been running on a busy parkway. The location doesn't matter for running, and you don't need special clothes or fancy shoes. I buy my sneakers at thrift stores, and I get my running clothes at rummage sales. You can even run barefoot. David Epstein writes in Sports Illustrated that the Olympic runner Sammy Wanjiro, like many famous Kenyan runners, ran barefoot as a child because he did not have money for sneakers. According to Wikipedia, in 1960, an Ethiopian runner set a new world record and won the Olympic marathon in Rome barefoot because the shoe supplier had no shoes left in his size. So there goes that excuse. Running truly is beneficial and open to all. It does not have the geographical and financial barriers of some other sports, and even people who have never run before can, with determination, make slow and steady progress until they're successful. George Sheehan, a doctor, author, runner, and author of a New York Times best-selling book about running, said, "Happiness is different than pleasure. Happiness has something to do with struggling, and enduring, and accomplishing. He'll never be an Eric Little. Remember my dad, the man who had never even run 1 mile before? Well, a year after he started running, he entered in a half marathon and finished the 13.24 miles still on his feet." Thank you very much.
I feel like clapping. Thank you for both of you. I need to clap after all of you. Oh, good job, Annika. Good job, all of you. I truly did enjoy this class this summer. The students were just amazing. Speaking about classes, while the judges are working on this ballot, I'm going to tell you about a couple of rhetoric classes that Kepler is offering this fall. So if you're interested, listen up. Rhetoric in an Internet Age, taught by Clark Widener, I'm not sure if I said that right, is a course designed to develop techniques used in interpersonal, group, public, social media, and other mass communication settings. The focus will be on developing individual ability to communicate Christian thought for effective engagement with culture. Sounds like it would be a great course to follow on the one that we did this summer. Another course that is going to be offered this fall is Leadership and Calling. It's a rhetoric course taught by Gregory Soderbergh. Rooted in the truths of Scripture and the wisdom of the Christian tradition, students will learn from the past in order to discern how to lead well now and in the future. This course guides students through an in-depth, thoughtful, biblical exploration of calling, vocation, and personal gifting. Both of those courses are still available, and we're excited to be offering those this summer with or this fall with Kepler. So if you're interested, let us know. Okay, are my judges ready, or shall I keep speaking?
Ready.
My judges are ready. I didn't pick on another one. Let's see. Do I have a volunteer between Jerome and Thomas? Thomas, okay. So, Thomas, don't forget to unmute, and you are on.
Did he freeze
Yes, he
on your
did.
screens as well? Well, I guess later on he can watch it and see what happened with his thumbnail. I'm actually going to send him out of the room and have him come back, and we'll see if he pops back in. Right. Okay. The adventures, I suppose, of a live. We'll give him a couple of minutes, and if not, we can come to the next student.
Okay, we'll give him a couple minutes then.
Carl Berglund comments that he's glad he gets to watch and that he doesn't have to judge.
I am too.
Wonderful poise and confidence from the students. Congratulations to Mrs. Miller's students. Oh, here we go. Hey, Thomas. No big deal.
Internet. Should I start over?
Yes. Yeah. It actually was perfect timing because you had not begun when you froze on our screen.
Oh, okay. Okay. I live in California and have been homeschooled my whole life. I also love playing and watching football, so when I learned that California did not allow homeschoolers to play high school sports, I had to ask why they would make such a law. In certain states, California and Texas being good examples, homeschoolers cannot play high school sports. Today, I would like to talk about how homeschoolers pay taxes for things they can never use, how the concerns of the California Interscholastic Association, the CIF, about grades can be dismantled, and why it is not fair that people who want a different kind of education cannot participate in high school sports. First, homeschoolers cannot participate in high school sports, yet still have to pay taxes. Everything used in public schools is paid by taxes, and sports facilities are no exception. Parents of homeschoolers have no choice but to pay taxes for sports fields and equipment. Homeschoolers still have to pay the same amount of taxes as public schoolers. There is no homeschooler discount. Second, if the state of California required that students take standardized tests, the CIF would not have to worry about grades. If homeschoolers could show that they were keeping up with their academic subjects, there would be absolutely no reason to ban them from participating in high school sports. For example, according to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, the HSLDA, in Oregon, homeschoolers are required to take tests in grades 3, 5, 8, and 10, and are allowed to participate in high school sports. This matters because standardized tests would solve all the concerns of the CIF. Third, preventing people with a different kind of education from doing an extracurricular activity is simply unfair. The only difference between homeschoolers and public schoolers is that they do not necessarily study the same subjects or study subjects in the same ways. For example, I, like many other homeschoolers, am studying competitive speech, which is not commonplace in public schools. A different form of education should not mean the student is banned from public school extracurricular activities. In conclusion, homeschoolers should be allowed to play high school sports. The people who are affected by the law do not even have a say in if it is passed or not. Because of that, even though I would very much like to play high school football, I cannot because of useless state laws. Thank you very much.
Thomas, thank you for that passionate speech. Appreciate it. We all love homeschoolers, obviously, here, and we would like you all to have the opportunities that you could have. It's sad that some states don't let you have those opportunities that other states do. Yes, I'm thinking of other opportunities right now. Kepler has 2 other classes this fall that fit in the category of rhetoric. One is another rhetoric course taught by Gregory Soderbergh. It is called Fitting Words, Classical Rhetoric for the Christian Student. Fitting Words is a course that instructs students in the art of classical rhetoric, providing them with tools of communication that will equip them for life. Students will learn the theory of using words well, study the greatest speeches of all time, and practice the skills of effective oratory. I know that would be an excellent class. I long for students everywhere to learn to speak in public because it's a skill they're going to need throughout their life. I remember, I'm trying to think who it was that said it, that most people would rather, that their biggest fear is speaking in public, and that they would actually rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy at a funeral. So we would like our students to not feel that way. We would like them to feel confident in any situation. And the last speech, or the last class that Kepler is offering, will be by Mr. Darren Doan. Mr. Darren Doan is an acclaimed filmmaker. He will be teaching a course titled Content Communication, Brand Building, and the Art and Science of Social Media. He will train and mentor students in filming, editing, music, photography, composition, design, and writing. Plus, he will do it in such a way that allows for daily communication and brand building. He will teach students all the essential skills and mindset that he implements for his own company and clients. What an amazing opportunity. Are my judges ready now for another speaker? Great. Our next speaker then will be Mr. Jerome Dittman. And Jerome, don't forget to unmute.
So imagine with me that David is talking with his friend, and in the conversation, David brings up the topic of the Bible. Now, after a pause, his friend, who is a critic, exclaims, "You know, I find it hard to believe that you could trust such an ancient book that's full of contradictions and errors. The people mentioned in the Bible do not even exist. We all know that. It has been changed over the years. Everyone knows it's full of mistakes." David tried to respond but could not find anything to say. The arguments had caught him off guard. All his life, David was taught that the Bible could be trusted, but now he was wondering if it could. So is the Bible true, or is it full of errors? The answer is simple. The Bible is a real historical document, and there is evidence to support it. Now that's a bold claim, so where's the evidence? That is what is going to be explored today. According to Dr. J. Weil, there are 3 tests which determine if a historical document is valid: the internal test, the external test, and the bibliographic test. In the next little while, I will be covering how well the Bible passes these and examining the Bible as though it were any other historical document. Dr. J. Weil also gives definitions for all 3 tests. The external test investigates how well the document aligns itself with other works of history. The internal test tests if the document in question has any internal contradictions. And the bibliographic test determines if the document in question has been changed over the years. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that the Bible is full of historical figures? The Bible talks about kings and nations, but is there any evidence for their existence? We come to the external test. So what is the external test? Remember that the external test investigates how well the document aligns itself with other historical facts, whether that historical fact be an archaeological discovery or another credible work of history. In the video series, Bible Unearthed, archaeologist Dr. Titus Kennedy talks about 2 discoveries that give credit to the existence of people mentioned in the Old Testament. The Cyrus cylinder was a discovery that confirmed King Cyrus mentioned in the Old Testament and his conquest of Babylon. The Taylor prism was a prism that recorded the military endeavors of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Now on this prism, it records a battle against the Israelite king Hezekiah. This battle against King Hezekiah was also recorded in 2 Kings 18:13 to 2 Kings 19:37, and it gives credit to the existence of Hezekiah and the reliability of the Bible. And there's much more evidence for the New Testament too. In his book, Exploring Creation with General Science, Dr. J. Weil records this section from Flavius Josephus' book, Antiquity to the Jews. Now around this time, Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and when Pilate, at the principal suggestion among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them again, alive, on the 3rd day. Wow, now that is clear confirmation of the Bible. And the stunning thing is, Dr. Weil notes that Flavius Josephus was not a Christian. The Bible fits in with history, but not only that, it is history. Okay, the Bible is aligned with history, but is David's friend correct in saying that it is riddled with contradictions and errors? It's time to see how the Bible fares with the internal test. Remember that the internal test tests if the document in question has any internal contradictions. Many of us have heard of contradictions in the Bible, but under closer examination, can they be explained? In short, they can. Most mistakes are actually the critic's mistake. A common misconception is over the death of Judas. Matthew tells us, "Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and hanged himself." But Acts account tells us, "Now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open and his entrails gushed out." Now at first glance, this seems like a contradiction, but it is actually not. According to answers in Genesis, Judas's body would have bloated in the hot weather near Jerusalem while he was hanging there. So when the branch or rope he was hanging on broke, his body, now like an overinflated balloon, would have burst open. There are many alleged contradictions in the Bible that simply come from failure to read the text carefully. After all, isn't Matthew's genealogy of Jesus different than Luke's? But on more careful examination, we find that one traces the family line through Joseph and the other through his mother. So the Bible is not full of errors. Rather, in the Bible, realize that whether you're reading Old Testament or New, they are consistent with each other. God's words are not contradictory. Now that's pretty amazing, but there is one more important thing that must be tested. The Bible is a very old book. Has it been changed over the years? Did the original Bible say something different than what it does today? How do we even test that? We have one final test, the bibliographic test. Recall the definition for the bibliographic test. The bibliographic test determines if the document in question has been changed over the years. It's like in telephone, when someone whispers something in someone's ear, and you go around in a circle whispering that phrase or word. And sometimes the end product doesn't even vaguely resemble the original word or phrase. You might start it off as saying, I heard there was pizza for lunch. And it might come back as, I heard there were pigs for brunch. Is this the case with the Bible? Do we have Jesus' words in our Bible today? Or is it how David's friend said, where it's been changed over the years? If there are a lot of copies of the document and a short amount of time between the first copy and the original, then it is well preserved. The less time between the first copy and the original, the better. So let's see how some other historical documents pass the test to see how it works. According to SusanCAnthony.com, Sophocles' works had 193 copies, and the first was 1,400 years after the original. Dr. J. Weil looks at how well Cornelius Tacitus' works pass the test. Cornelius Tacitus' works have given us facts about the Roman Empire in the 1st century, and there are 20 copies of his work, with the first copy being 1,000 years after the original. What about the Bible? Dr. Weil looks at the New Testament too. The New Testament has 24,000 copies, and the first copy was only 25 years after the original. It passes better than any other historical document of its time. But the Old Testament is much older. Until recently, the earliest copy of the Old Testament was written in 895 AD, while the original was 395 BC. Answers in Genesis tells the story about a discovery that gave much credit to the Old Testament. One day, in 1947, near the shore of the Dead Sea, a shepherd found a cave, and he threw a stone into it, and he heard something unexpected ring out. He heard pottery shatter. As it turned out, this led to the discovery of something astonishing, an archaeological treasure. The treasure was scrolls that contained a part of every single Old Testament book except for Esther. And the entire book of Isaiah was included. They were written 1,000 years before any other Old Testament copies, from around 300 BC to 70 AD, according to compellingtruth.org. That gave a lot of evidence to the reliability of the Old Testament. And as author William Green put it this way, it may be safely said that no other work of history has been so accurately transmitted. Think about this for a moment. When you hold a Bible, you are holding the same words that scribes wrote 2,000 or more years ago. The Bible was not changed over the years. It is consistent with archaeology and outside sources, and it has no contradictions within itself. It is a legitimate work of history and should be treated as such. I hope anyone who does an unbiased research and a careful examination of the Bible will come to that conclusion too. Now, as for David, he studied up on the Bible, and after seeing the enormous amount of compelling evidence, he was ready to give a reason for the hope and faith he had in the Bible, and left without a doubt that the Bible is a real historical document, and there is evidence to back it. Thank you. And a special thanks to the judges for evaluating my speech today.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Thank you for your passion. God's word is incredible. We work with Wycliffe Bible translators, and God's word is the perfect missionary. We need to have it, and I appreciate your defense of Scripture. Yes. One of the key teaching rhetoric to young people, I feel like, is is a key point for helping them to affect our culture. We want our students to go out there and to be culture changers, to be ones that speak effective truth to this culture that needs it so desperately. There are one of the most effective ways I have found to teach rhetoric is a competitive speech and debate league. That's why my class this summer was Intro to Competitive Speech. I would love to see every student compete in speech and debate. There are 3 Christian competitive speech and debate leagues that I encourage you to investigate. There's the National Christian Forensics and Communications Association, or the NCFCA. There's also STOA, and the third is the Institute for Cultural Communicators. All 3 have the goal of teaching young people to learn to communicate God's truth to a world that desperately needs it. So I urge you to check those out. I could put the names in the comment box, I guess. That might be helpful. And while our judges are finishing up with their particular competition, do we have Rebecca yet? Not quite yet. I'm sure she'll be coming along soon. There she is. Yep. While they're finishing, my students, I know, we taught them all a basic speech outline, which is essentially something like an essay outline, although an essay written form is very different from a spoken form. But these students practiced it with impromptus all summer, and they also practiced it by working on these speeches. So I could go on about that, but I think we'll wait just a minute. Are the judges ready to go on? I know, Rebecca, you've just joined us. Are you feeling confident and ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, so, and you've turned off your mic. That's great. I'm going to mute myself and you're on.
Have you ever left your car keys at the door and had to go back for them? Got to work and then realized you had forgotten your phone? According to NPR News, a Washington Reserve officer once left something even more important on his kitchen counter: his election ballot. Without it, he was unable to vote for his colleague, Kevin Enzi, who was running for the State House of Representatives. Imagine this officer's horror when he later discovered that Enzi had lost the election. Not by 100 votes, not by 50 votes, nor even by 10 votes, but by a single vote margin. What would have happened if he had not forgotten his ballot on the kitchen counter that day? If one more young person had registered as a voter despite not feeling up to the task? If one more citizen had showed up at that polling location to exercise his civic responsibility? We'll never know, because no one did. As a young person with an interest in civics, one of the main reasons I hear from people who don't vote in political elections is that they don't think their vote counts for anything. After all, this is a huge country with a huge population. What difference could a single vote out of millions make? In reality, your vote often makes more of a difference than you think. But far more importantly, even if it didn't, your vote would still be your duty as an American citizen and not just some random privilege you can take or leave. We're going to begin by discussing why many Americans don't vote. We'll then look at why this is a problem, and finally, at what you can do to help fix it. To understand how to fix a problem, we must first understand the problem itself. In the 2012 presidential election, according to Ann Sismar of Eastern Kentucky University, only about 55% of the voting age population turned out to vote. Worse yet are percentages for midterm elections, the elections that occur in between presidential ones. Not to mention the state and local elections of odd-numbered years, which hardly anyone knows, much less cares about. According to Pew Research Center, despite being the #1 most developed country in the world, the United States would barely be visible on a list of countries arranged by voter turnout rates, ranking a mere number 31. A situation like this begs the question of why. This is not an easy question to answer, as many different factors have been measured. These include the complexity of the voting process, strict voter identification laws in certain states, and the fact that elections fall on Tuesday, one of the busiest workdays. As Sismar put it, many Americans may simply determine that the costs of voting outweigh its potential benefits. Arguably, however, the main problem at hand is a lack of political interest. More specifically, a lack of political efficacy. After all, if we have a strong motivation to vote, it doesn't matter how complex the registration process is or how busy we are on Tuesdays, we will work around that. The Bill of Rights Institute defines political efficacy as the answer to the question, does your vote matter? Sadly, for many Americans, the answer to this question is no. The truth is, though, that according to NPR, over the past 20 years, there have been at least 12 elections determined by a single vote or by a tiebreaker. And yes, these were often just small local elections, but this trend is not uncommon on a larger scale either. As we learn from the same source, George W. Bush won the 2000 presidential election by just a 0.00895% margin. Not only this, but it took an intense recounts and even a Supreme Court case to finally grant him his office. But why is low voter turnout even a problem? Why does it matter that almost half of the population doesn't cast a ballot? The other half covers for them, right? Well, let's say you were trying to figure out how many people in your family prefer cats and how many prefer dogs. What would you do? You would get the opinion of each and every family member. You wouldn't just ask one sibling, take their opinion, and assume it's everyone else's opinion too. That would not be a representative sample of your family. In the same way, the sample we currently have of voters is not representative of the eligible population. As Sismar points out, those who are older and have higher incomes take to the polls at far higher rates than others. Government officials will cater to those who voted in order to win them again in the next election, ignoring those who didn't. Thus, those who don't vote effectively silence their voice in government. In the words of Jared Roberts of Truman Media Network, the country continues to function based on a small group of people's opinions. This means that the people who always vote make the decisions, even if those decisions do not benefit the country as a whole. This has devastating effects on our system of democracy. Democracy means rule by the people. How does it stand when the people are not interested in ruling? Democracy relies on the voice of the people. How can it continue when the people don't recognize that they have a voice at all? We've looked so far at why people don't vote and why this is dangerous for a democracy. That brings me to my last point. What can you do about this? The first thing you can do is inform yourself. This is, after all, an important decision we are making, and we must make the most of it. As HeroNet tells us, uneducated voting gets ineffective politicians in office, who are usually only there because they know how to play the system. To prevent this, we must try our best to stay informed. This is achieved through a simple, quick internet search on the elections coming up, the candidates you're to choose from, and the policies they uphold. Talk to your family and friends and get their opinions. Get exposed to all this information, and then make a choice on who you believe will do the most good for your city, state, or nation. If you find yourself especially passionate about a candidate, there's another thing you can consider doing. Join a political campaign and mobilize others to vote for that candidate. A candidate's website will usually list volunteer events where you can engage in activities such as phone banking or door-to-door canvassing. Whether you support someone silently or influence others into supporting them as well, it all comes down to one thing: decide to vote and commit to that decision. The factor that discourages many Americans from voting in political elections is a lack of political efficacy, the feeling that their vote doesn't make a difference. This causes uneven representation, which poses danger to our democracy. We can help fix this problem by educating ourselves, casting our ballots, and encouraging those around us to do the same. At the end of the day, this is not just some advantage we can take or leave. This is not a privilege. This is not even a right. This is a duty. A duty to our country, a responsibility to our history, and an obligation to thousands of suffragists who fought to make this a reality for all of us. Taking a few short minutes to cast a vote could make all the difference for both ourselves and for others. And who knows, that vote of yours could very well be the deciding factor in the next election you voted, as long as, of course, you make sure not to leave your ballot on the kitchen counter. Thank you so much for your time.
What a great message for an election year. We have an election year coming up, so everybody that has the opportunity to vote needs to get out there and vote. While our judges are finishing their decisions and writing on the ballots, I was thinking about our class this summer. I did teach the students. I started, as I mentioned earlier, with just what I call the basic speech outline. It really is very similar to like a 5-paragraph essay sort of a format. But we emphasize different things in it because it's an oral form. So I wondered if my students would just tell us, what do they remember about, like, what were the 3 parts of an introduction? And tell me one of them and what the purpose is. Do I have any volunteers to tell me one? Thomas, go ahead.
Well, the first part is the hook, and it's meant to draw the audience in.
Okay, good, yes. And I'm sure you heard a hook in every one of these speeches. That's great. And then what's another part of the introduction? There were 3 parts. Thomas again, go for it, dear.
And then you have the message, so what you want the audience to remember.
Exactly. What you want them to take away from your speech. Yep, what you want them to remember. And then there's one more part to the introduction that's kind of optional if you want to. Jerome.
The third part is the roadmap, and that tells the audience what you're going to tell them in the speech. It tells them what the main points will be.
Good. Yes, that's exactly it. Okay, kind of gives a preview of what your main points are. Yep. And then we talked about the main points some, and we talked about the conclusion, and the conclusion basically mirrors the introduction, where you need all 3 of those parts in there again. Let's see. So that you have to end, and I know that you heard this with all the students where they came back to their hook at the end, because that's a way to kind of wrap up the speech. We called that the tie-in. Let me think, what other things? I know that we worked this summer, I had the students watch a whole bunch of speeches, both competitive speeches that have been recorded and also speeches from adults through the years. I love the idea of Mr. Soderberg saying that he's going to have students study the greatest speeches of all time. That will be incredibly important. And I think the students learned a lot from watching other people give speeches. Does anybody remember one particular speech or anything about a particular speech that you'd like to tell us? One that you watched? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Rebecca.
I think around the first speech I watched, it was called RSVP. And I just remember it very distinctly because it had such a clear message that really stuck with me, even though I don't remember everything from it. And now every time I think about commitment and I'm tempted not to commit to something, I just remember Répondez s'il vous plaît, RSVP in my head.
I hear you. I love that speech too. She does. She does an excellent job of telling us commit to something. Thomas, what do you remember?
Well, this isn't an NCFCA speech, but it was a speech that I was assigned to watch, and that would be "I Have a Dream."
Oh,
And it was really effective because Martin Luther King Jr., he let the words settle in. He also used repetition a lot.
yes,
So his message would
yes.
stick in your head.
Such an important message for us today, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, are the judges ready? I think the judges are ready.
Yes. We have sent the results to you through Slack. If you're able to
I see that. Oh, so I get to go ahead and get them.
Yeah. Well, before you do that, I just thought I would show off the medal, which I have in my hands. See if we can get a good view of it. There it is. Beautiful and majestic. You could wear it when you go to the Sonic Drive-In. And of course, there's a $100 gift card as a prize as well.
I was muted. Thank you so much to my students for participating both in class and in this competition this summer. You participated in the first annual summer speech competition that Kepler has given for the Leonberg Prize for Excellence. So thank you so much. And the judges would like to award first prize to Rebecca Che. Rebecca, thank you so much for your speech.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else you want to say, Jeffrey or Scott?
Well, I would like to thank everybody for participating, and I was very impressed. Well, I'm impressed with Mrs. Miller and with each of the students, particularly for everyone's courage and engagement. There was a whole lot of compelling eye contact from each of you. And so I really appreciated that you guys forced me to pay attention. So thank you and kudos to all of you for that.
Yeah, I think they're all wonderful, but I'm biased. So I told them that there's no way I could judge this competition because I just would be too conflicted. So thank you all so much for participating. Thank you for my students, and thank you for this opportunity, Scott and Joffrey. I really appreciate it. Thank you for judging, Helen. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Miller, and thanks
you for
everybody.
all
of you students.
So long.
Well done.